broadly, any type of brand infringement really is considered fraud in nature, but we do need to kind of understand the intent of a site to determine what that best enforcement is going to be. Because we want to talk from a couple different perspectives today about what that looks like. So I've brought a great team with me today. I'm going to have them introduce themselves, and then we'll kind of start going through some questions. So Nina, do you want to start us off?
Hi everyone. Years in 2019.
Wow.
AIG,
that's amazing.
Yeah, we are celebrating our centennial year. AIG is a global insurance provider with operations in over 80 countries and jurisdictions. And we provide a range of insurance products to our customers like general insurance, property and casualty, life insurance, and retirement and financial solutions. Within AIG, my role is into project management, program management, and in addition to my day job in IT, I also have been managing brand protection for over 5 years. And I have formed a brand protection committee where we have members from intellectual property team, legal, branding, social media, mobile apps, cybersecurity, threat intelligence. We like to give fancy names to the teams. So it's working. So we have all these teams, and I also work with business units, marketing departments across the globe to verify the infringements whenever they are reported and to determine enforcement actions.
Awesome, thank you. Brian?
Sure, hi, I'm Brian Speer. I'm managing counsel at the Bank of New York Mellon. I work in the IP and technology department in legal, and I support the enterprise-wide bank in terms of IP clearance, use, transactions, and that includes IP enforcement for both fraud and brand issues. I also work on some privacy-related and technology-related issues. And before my time at the bank, I was in the retail section.
Cool. Sean?
Good afternoon. Sean DeWitt. I'm from TripAdvisor. I run the SOC, Security Operations Center. In this context, we deal with phishing against our customers and our employees and engage MarkMonitor in those takedown activity. We also utilize their brand protection services as well. Prior to running the SOC at TripAdvisor, I spent about 15 years at the Mitre Corporation in various security engineering roles.
Great. I'm so happy to have you guys up here because it's really a cross-section of services, and we can really talk about how brand and fraud is enforced upon. One of the things that we get a lot from these different events that we do with customers is a lot of feedback about, what is the best enforcement method? How do we know how to enforce and when to enforce, and when to contact the registrar, the registrant, the ISP, et cetera. So what we want to talk about today, again, are those different examples and just talk through how we do it, but also how we work with the different departments within these different companies to make sure that we're effectively enforcing. So Mina, I'm going to ask you the first question. Can you just go through some of the different types of enforcements that you typically do at AIG?
Sure. So we see high volume of trademark and copyright infringements, and we enforce on them. Definitely, there is a huge difference between the trademark enforcements we do and the phishing takedowns we do. So we see, a lot of trademark and copyright issues on websites, on YouTube videos, other social media channels and handles, LinkedIn, Twitter, and we also see infringing mobile apps in the app stores in the marketplace, and we see, imposter profiles using our executive names. We do monitor those kind of stuff. If I talk about trademark infringements, we see them mainly in two categories, websites and paid search ads on search engines.
Yeah.
So the number of paid search ads we see is amazingly high, and they are mostly on Yahoo and Bing, and we don't see as many on Google, although we do find infringing ads on Google every month. These ads, they bid on our branded keywords and our trademarks. We have plenty of companies under one umbrella: Valak, American General, Travel Guard, AIG. So they bid on all these branded keywords, and they drive up our marketing spend on paid search advertising. So good news is they are easy enforcements, and we are able to take most of them down. If you talk about websites, we see anything from trademark and domain name to false affiliation within the content of the site. We see some interesting infringements like, websites offering short-term, high-interest cash loans pretending to be an AIG company. Some of these sites even use our logo, the look and feel, the brand colors, everything is used to, trick customers into submitting their personal information to fill a form to apply for those loans. I talk about volumes just to give an idea. We sent out a few thousand, over 3,000 enforcements for websites and over 25,000 for paid search ads, few hundred social media, mobile apps, and phishing takedowns were only a handful. This is just for the last year.
Really?
Yeah.
So you have
which is a good
more,
news.
yeah, much more trademark and brand infringements than you have phishing
Yes.
at all.
Yes,
Oh,
that's
okay.
correct.
Interesting. So that was my next question: is how much was brand versus fraud? But so Sean, can you talk through what you're dealing with TripAdvisor the most? And I think that you do more with fraud than with brand, right? But can you talk about the brand and fraud aspect?
Yeah, so usually the SOC is the first stop for any infringement,
Right.
and then we'll sort out whether it's brand and we need to go into legal, or
Oh,
we
okay.
determine if it's fraud. The big ones that kind of when we first got started on this enforcement road was people who would copy our website and then overlay ads on top of that. It seems like it's really fraud because you can click in it, you can sign into TripAdvisor, you can do searches, but the ads that are overlaid on it are actually redirecting to other sites. So your cost per click ads. So that for me was like, oh, it's definitely fraud. They're taking usernames, passwords, and we kind of looked through it. It's like, no, that's our site. We're taking the username and password. They're just using it to overlay. So that's what that's kind of like the low-hanging fruit that we deal with a lot. And we send that off to legal with the evidence that we have. When we do have to make the determination whether it's phishing or fraud, I don't know if anyone else likes to do this, but I'm a security guy, so I like to mess with people. We'll actually try to engage whoever is running the site or who's ever trying to create money off these ads. We'll follow the ads, and if one of those ads are actually a phishing ad, at that point in time, we try to make the case that it's a stepping stone to a phishing website. So it's not just how do we look at it on the landing page, but where can we get to from here? And sometimes you click on the ad, it's rotating. It's really just an ad. The next, it's a phishing site. The next time, it's another real ad and not fraud. So we'll go through and we'll collect a bunch of we'll collect the endpoints and say, okay, 7 times out of 10 it goes to a phishing site. The other 3, it's actually, it's not a malicious ad or anything like that.
And then that goes to your legal
And
team?
then if we can show that there's a link to fraud, we send it to the SOC
Right.
as a fraud.
To MarkMonitor SOC.
To MarkMonitor SOC. Otherwise, we'll send it to legal and ask them what they want to do.
Okay. So it's interesting to me that your SOC is the one that's evaluating for that enforcement, so determining whether it's fraud or brand and then sending to legal. And I'm wondering if you guys have any insight into kind of who's the first pass, usually looking at these like at AIG, who's the first pass when something comes in the door? Is it go to a SOC first, or does it go to legal review first, or who kind of reviews that?
So we have our brand protection divided into 2 prime categories. One is the brand infringements, we call them, and second is the cyber security or threat intelligence. These are 2 different teams. The brand protection sits within information technology, and that's how I'm landed on it. So my team is the first point where anything is reported internally or by other departments, employees, and MarkMonitor. We review and also work globally because we have something could have been reported in China, in Malaysia. So we reach out to all those folks and because make sure that somebody using our trademark is not actually authorized through some kind of local arrangement, or
Right.
they are not a partner of AIG. So we are the first point of contact, but since we are IT, we are not legal. I work very heavily with legal and intellectual property teams, branding teams.
Okay.
Sometimes there are things in progress which is still confidential. No one knows other than legal. So it's a good idea to reach out to them for their advice and opinion and see.
So you're a little bit of a gateway that then kind of divides it up to who needs to action it in some regards.
We ourselves do analyze the infringements for US. Anything outside of US, we review with the local teams and also review the type of infringement and
Sure.
see what action needs to be taken. But as needed, we engage legal, IP, and branding.
Okay, cool. So Brian, I'm going to go to you. So just in general, when you're looking at an infringement, do you look at intent to determine what the best enforcement scenario is, or kind of what's your thought process on that?
Yeah, I think you have to. I mean, depending on your brand or your industry, you could be dealing with thousands of, you're talking about typo squatters, domain squatters, social media, app stores, phishing emails, the wide range of things, counterfeiting sites, marketplaces that will come eventually when land on your desk, and everyone's going to say, take it down. Depending on the volume, you can't throw the kitchen sink at every single instance. You've got to do some triaging. I mean, I would love to file a UDRP on every domain that we find, but that doesn't really scale.
No.
So I think you need to have some playbooks ready to go in terms of how you're going to triage the different types of things that are come your way based on the risk profile of your company. How is this really, how much is this affecting the company? How much is it affecting our clients and people outside of that? Are they just squatting on the domain, but they're not, there's no content, there are no MX records set up for emails, there's no DNS set up. Maybe they just bought up a whole bunch of domains based on your name, or a lot of times what you'll see is after you file a new trademark application, if you don't buy the domain up right away, they're looking at that and they'll buy up different iterations and then basically try and sell it back to you.
Right.
Depending on your risk profile and your considerations, maybe there you're going to decide to send cease and desist letters, let them know that, hey, we know what you're doing, we're watching you, put it into monitoring with MarkMonitor or your internal teams. If there's content on the site and it's clearly an active case of phishing where they are actively trying to fraudulently induce people to give them passwords or account numbers, there obviously you want to be more aggressive, more timely to try and take it down before real harm is done. And then there's everything in between. Sometimes you're bound by, if you're on a social media site, you live and die by their rules and their forms.
Sure.
and their remediations. And then you have to decide basically, I've got this toolkit of, I got a UDRP, cease and desist. I can escalate it to outside counsel. I can ask internal counsel to write a cease and desist letter. I can go, if it's a counterfeit site and they've got a payment processor, maybe I'll reach out to the payment processor and try and freeze their funds. But you've got these toolkits, and you can't do everything on every hit that comes your way. I wish we could.
Well, that's about being efficient, right?
Right.
And choosing kind of what is the most efficient avenue for that. Now, you brought up a good story about, you said with the brand and domain name, you want to look and see if there's MX records on that. And that's specifically in regard to BEC scams, business email compromise scams, or employee spear phishing. So when you see something like that, kind of what's your first impulse? Is it to enforce on the domain name, or is it to enforce as a fraudulent activity?
Well, my experience has shown is you have to view it holistically. I don't like to bucket it as this is a brand enforcement, this is a fraud or a scam enforcement, because in order for it to be a successful scam, I'm assuming that they have to use your brand. Otherwise, what's the hook? So we try and view it holistically, get everyone to the table to look at an issue together, and it's really case specific, right?
Right.
So what information are you able to get? You know, are we comfortable just monitoring it? Is there something we want to do? Again, if they just have a trademark and a domain, there are no DNS records, there's no MX records, you have no records or evidence of any other wrongdoing, you make a decision based on your program.
Right. So Mina and Sean, do you guys deal with employee spear phishing very much, or BEC scams, or executive impersonation type scams that come in that is using the AIG name or the TripAdvisor name and targeting employees?
So in the past, we've dealt with, impersonation kind of scams, and we have a cybersecurity team which also, monitors and detects in addition to MarkMonitor's monitoring, and we have 24/7 monitoring center. So, they deal with the phishing scams detection, monitoring, and takedowns.
Okay, Sean?
Yeah, so I think every company deals with the BEC scams and the impersonations, and we just kind of go in layers. We'll do phishing attacks against our employees as an executive, and so to train them not to trust the executives' names. We also have internal systems that are watching email flow through, so if it looks a little weird, then we'll take a look at it. And again, I'm a security guy, so I'm a jerk. If we do capture any of these BECs, we'll actually play rope-a-dope, and we'll respond to them like we're trying to be a very helpful employee to help them along their way, and then we'll capture as much information that we can from the threat actor, and then forward that on either to MarkMonitor if they decide that they're gonna point us to a phishing website, or to the FBI, or to both, or to whatever agency handles that. So,
Sure.
yeah, we definitely get a handful of them, and we've had to really tune our systems to be very specific to how we catch without blocking legitimate business email, and that's kind of the compromise we have to make.
Right. Well, first of all, I would say that messing with the phisher or the fraudster is not being a jerk. It's effective threat management, right? But so do you find any interesting information? I'm just curious, when you do that, you're able to kind of trace that back to any information that's usable?
Yeah, so we usually end up getting bank account information, and we've worked with the FBI really closely with banking information.
Okay.
And we'll send them the data, the emails, and we'll allow them to do their law enforcement and their warrants, whatever they want to do on the back end. Usually after that, they kind of leave us out of what happened afterwards.
Okay.
But it's kind of like, we're a travel company, we help people travel, and every now and then we get to, help law enforcement protect the customers or to get them their money back if they've been scammed using our brand.
Right.
And to build a little bit more trust in the TripAdvisor brand if they had been previously scammed.
Right. Okay. So that's interesting. I mean, when we see a new domain registration that has your brand's name in it, typically at that point it's really just a brand infringement in the domain name. But I think when you have proof of an activity like an employee spearfish or something like that, then you have the proof that you need to take that down as a fraud enforcement if you have the original email and headers. So I think that is one efficient method that you can utilize when you're dealing with those types of scams. So I wanted to talk a little bit more, sorry, I know that's like right there, about the brand and domain name. If there's no infringing content or proof of fraud. We talked about kind of what your thought process is, Brian. I know that you send that to your legal group. And are you guys pretty aggressive about C&Ds in general when you have just brand and domain, or do you really kind of focus on branded content? What's the division of that in terms of how aggressive you are in enforcement?
So there are a couple of ways to go about it. I think one is, like he mentioned that if there are no MX records, maybe worth waiting and monitoring for infringing content to show up. Sometimes there are certain domain names which clearly indicate, which uses our trademark and indicates insurance-related stuff. And then, we might want to enforce and acquire that domain. And we've done that in the past. This is a reactive approach, right? We see an infringement out there and we just want to go grab it so that no further misuse takes place. We also, another proactive approach that we take is defensive domain registrations. And we do a lot of them in order to make sure that, domain squatters or infringers don't misuse those domains for any kind of spoofing or any, in worst case, to initiate the phishing attacks. We register these domains with our trademarks and also with the names of executive leadership teams.
So do you ever use UDRP or URS, or is that something that you commonly employ? And at what point do you employ that?
So we have to begin with, we have a multi-step enforcement process with our legal counsels as well as with MarkMonitor, where we send out multiple rounds of letters or claims to website, domain owners, social media handles, ISPs, mobile app stores, developers. If nothing works, then we may not necessarily send UDRP for everything. We have to carefully analyze the infringement, and we have to see whether the benefits outweigh the cost of UDRP or whether there is any chances of it firing back, in terms of bad publicity.
Sure.
So, of course, when there is a possibility of a fraud or a security threat to AIG, its customers, business partners, or site users, then we definitely go the UDRP route.
Okay. Brian, do you have any thoughts on UDRP and URS and when you might utilize that?
Yeah, I think it's good to remember it's in your toolkit. I think there are certain scenarios where it makes sense. I mean, again, if you're talking on an individual, UDRP is not overly expensive, but when you're talking on scale, it can quickly eat up an entire budget. So you've got to be tactical, and it's not quick. And there are certain thresholds that you need to meet in order to be able to show bad faith. So you have to make sure that the scenario you have in front of you really falls within there, otherwise you've wasted time. And again, if this is something that is an emergent need where there's an ongoing sort of phishing campaign or other dangerous activity, you're not going to want to wait 3 or 4 months in order to get a UDRP decision and have the site turned over to you. They're going to be long gone by then. And one thing that I was trying to be cognizant of is, yes, you'll get that domain, and if it, depending on whatever the actual domain name is, that's useful, but there's nothing stopping that bad actor from, changing one letter or adding a 1 at the end, or changing the domain and then starting the process up again. So you have to, I think, pick and choose your battles. The URS is a little easier, a little cheaper, easier to do yourself or internally, as opposed to needing maybe an outside counsel or service provider to prepare a UDRP claim. But again, you still have a few weeks before you're going to get a determination, and depending on what case you have in front of you, it may be too late. So I think you have to use the tools available in terms of, there are times when I've directed to send a cease and desist, and I'm like, it's not going to do anything, you're never going to hear back, and then you hear back from the registrant, and they're like, oh, sorry, I'll drop the domain. So you never know.
Right.
I think you've got to explore all other options. I find reaching out to the ISPs is actually pretty effective if you have a clear case of some kind of fraudulent or bad activity.
Right.
They are pretty responsive in terms of getting fraudcasting up to at least stem the flow of any further victims, while you can then determine, okay, what are we going to do to now get the site down and get that domain away from the bad actor, but at least no one else is going to that site.
Right, right. Well, and I definitely agree with you. Anytime that you can prove fraud activities going on, whether it's a phishing email, an employee scam, any other type of scam, when you can independently prove that to an ISP, that's going to be the most effective and efficient method, because it's usually down in a few hours rather than C&D waiting on that. So let's talk a little bit more about phishing, and I'm going to go to you, Sean, because I know you're the king of phishing here. So can you tell me more about what is the benefit of Phishing TripAdvisor? What do they get out of it?
Okay, so Phishing TripAdvisor is easy because it's a household name. I think just about everybody's heard about it. And if you haven't, it's tripadvisor.com. And it's all monetary. We have a large vacation rental footprint, and people will spend a lot of money to go to Cabo for a week in a really nice house. So, so I think the biggest benefit that they get is all money. They're not, the biggest target isn't someone trying to steal our customer credentials. They're not trying to log in, and they can get their own account and attack the site if they were a security researcher or somebody.
Right.
So it's all monetary.
But it's not a traditional, 10 years ago, 5 years ago even, and with most financials, it's really a financial intent to get into a bank account. But what we're seeing is so many other companies out here experiencing phishing, but for other reasons. They're pulling the data and utilizing it in other ways. So I think that's like a good example of that, right?
Yeah. So it's almost, I'm going to say 99% is going to be just they're trying to get somebody to wire transfer them a down payment for their rental. And that's how they usually start is they go to a listing site that they can post an ad for free and say, oh, here's my vacation rental in Martha's Vineyard. It's going to be, it's about 80% of what you would normally pay, so people get excited. They look at their financial benefit for booking something off of TripAdvisor. The people will send them a little message that says, hey, save me a little bit of money on the booking fee for TripAdvisor and just wire me the money directly. And before you know it, we're getting an email in our abuse feed that says, hey, I'm not getting a response from the renter for the property I rented.
Sure.
And that's when we have to go back through there. Where did this start? We know where it started. Did I say something wrong? Where did it start? Get all the email communication so that we can start the shutdown process. And we also will help them contact their financial information institute, tell them what they have to ask for so that they can hopefully recuperate some of their costs, and hopefully they get their money back. But that's what really started our anti-phishing program.
Okay.
Is my team and I were sitting there and we're getting these emails about fraudulent activity, and our stance at that point in time was, well, you didn't book through us, our payment protection doesn't apply to you, sorry, you should call law enforcement.
Oh.
And after you see that a few times, you're like, you know what, let's do something about this. So that's when we started really gathering the information we needed in order to act shutdowns on these sites or to help law enforcement help the people who have been defrauded.
Depending on the season. Oh yeah, I guess you would be cyclical with the kind of vacation seasons and things.
Yeah, so a couple months before Christmas and then right before summer vacation, that's kind of the trend that we expect
Interesting.
to see.
Okay. So I'm going to do a quick time. Brad, can you tell me what time it is or how much we have left because the little clock here isn't working?
So 7 minutes.
7 minutes, okay. So I have one more question for you guys, and then we'll open it up to see if anybody else has questions. So I just wanted to understand a little bit more about how the different teams work together. And so if you had to look out at the audience and say, this is kind of a best practice in terms of having the SOC and the legal teams work together, what's kind of your best pieces of advice on kind of establishing the playbook, as you mentioned? Brian, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I think just communication. So many times you see individual groups that are siloed. Everyone has their piece that they manage. I think when you have a particular instance, I've always found it helpful to have the different teams involved, whether it's legal, information security, marketing, have everyone involved to really review it, chime in. They may have resources, particularly if you have an information security section or team, they may have resources to sort of dig in and do a little bit of the behind the scenes research that just me looking at a site, I would have no idea. And that sort of, any information you can gather helps you make that decision, and then you're building that playbook together. You are, okay, something comes in, here's what you do, here's who's responsible for looking at it, we jointly make a decision, and then action taken.
Right.
It's tracked, monitored, and we have, so you're not reinventing the wheel every time something comes in because someone from senior management saw something, sends an email freaking out saying, we got to get it taken down, what is this? And then you don't know who to go to, you don't know who to ask.
Right.
That way I find it useful to have a set team that is cross-functional. You get a holistic view. Sometimes your business people can tell you, oh no, that's okay. We're sponsoring that, or we're a business partner, or maybe if you find a domain that is registered by a third party, before you start sending out cease and desist letters, you ask the business or the marketing folks, and like, oh, that's actually our creative agency. We ask them to register that for us as they
Right.
build out a site, or any other kind of situation that I would have no way of knowing without asking and having that holistic view.
Right.
And that way you're not sending cease and desist to your vendor or your partner.
Yeah, your marketing agency
Right.
or whatever. So that's interesting. And I know, Mina, you talked about you guys have a bit of a task force, right, that kind of covers all those.
I think although every organization is unique and what may work for one may not work for the other, but we have a model which we call interaction model for brand protection where, like Brian rightly said, there are people from all different areas. And the reason it is at the forefront for information technology is because we work with the businesses across the globe. We know who to contact for life insurance related websites. We also work on domain assignments, SSL certificates, and a whole lot of other stuff, which gives us this leverage to use those relationships and verifications. But at the same time, we also work very closely with intellectual property, legal, and branding teams. We constantly, periodically, we review our enforcement letters. We review our process and see, what's lacking if we are not getting the right numbers. And we benchmark us with others in the industry, and try to kind of continuously evolve the process. And like Brian said, that's the key. Engage all the members, right, from different business areas, from different functional areas, and that's how you can get best output of your brand enforcement process.
And then I think, Sean, you're a little bit different because it goes through your SOC first, then goes to legal. Are there times when you guys are going back and forth on an issue?
Not really. We don't. They kind of trust us whether we know it's fraud or
Right.
brand.
Okay.
They know we initially try to get everything under fraud. Not gonna lie about that. Fraud's so much easier to get rid of than infringement. And if you can work to get that fraud
Sure.
aspect and prove it, not just make it up, then your life's a lot easier. But it's a teamwork effort. Even if you're not engaging MarkMonitor, if you do, it's not a set it and forget it type of task or program in your company. You have to continuously refine how you're working, how you're detecting these issues, and then reach back out to your partners and say, hey, this is how I'm detecting them now. It's changed since last year. Share their information. I think we've shared a lot of technical information on our end with MarkMonitor, mainly because we don't want to do it. We want to offload that work so that we can look at other security issues.
Right.
But other hints, other couple things, check with PR first, because even if it's malicious or not good for your brand, you might be like poking the bear, and PR's like, nope, we've dealt with those people before. We just leave them alone, because they're better left alone than poked. And then check with the registry. So don't go shutting down a domain that was registered well before your company was incorporated. That does happen, right?
Right.
And unlike some of my other team members who have tried to shut down TripAdvisor.com a couple times, which I get a laugh out of it. I mean, some of these URLs are weird. You get TripAdvisor.com, and then there's like this giant, URL that's attached to it.
Right.
And sometimes you're like, oh, this is fraud. Shut it down. It's like, no, that's us. We get the report, and we're like, okay, don't shut down that. And MarkMonitor's been really good with sending us a message, being like,
Yeah, I really hope we
really,
never try to shut down.
you were just joking about this, weren't you?
Well, that's great advice. And we have a minute left, and we'll open for questions. Any last bits of advice for the team, for the group? No? Okay. Any questions? I see a hand at the back. Somebody got a mic? Thank you, RJ.
Hi. I guess my question is more so when
Oh, Brian, you want to?
I mean, as an IP lawyer, I would say run everything through your legal. Any cease and desist letters, you want to make sure that you've got the correct entity listed, that you own what you're purporting to own, that the rights that you're trying to enforce are actually accurate. But I think it goes to sort of that initial intake and review. You want to make sure that you have a leg to stand on before you start sending out and trying to enforce. You want to make sure that it's not a legitimate or benign use where maybe it does turn around and then you've gotten yourself sort of in trouble for overreaching. So yeah, you want to make sure you have the rights that you are trying to enforce.
And just to add to what Brian said, although it has to be legally correct or accurate or appropriate, there should also be inputs from other teams like branding and, of course, the brand protection team, whatever that is in your organization, because those teams on a day-to-day basis, they deal with different business units, they deal with these enforcements, so they know, sometimes they get feedbacks. For example, we did, one of our business units in Malaysia, they shut down Advisor's website for whatever communication gap they had internally. So, that was not a problem we were able to reinstate with the help of MarkMonitor, but the problem was the language of the letter. It didn't seem like, it seemed too harsh to the agency. So then, that was an eye-opener for us, and we kind of, mellowed it down. We constantly, that's why we have this process of, continuously improving the process. Go back to the letter again once in a while, review it once a year, once in 6 months, and see, if you can do something about it.
And it's helpful, it's helpful to have a spectrum of your templates, right? You've got the softball, who are you? We want to, know what your relationship to us is. Maybe you're a vendor or partner, to take down, and we're going to do everything we can and sue you. And, there's in between there, and MarkMonitor can work with you to create those templates.
Right, it's a spectrum, right? You're going to go in soft and maybe kind of end up hard.
Right, again, it's all based on the situation you have in front of you.
Right.
And like Sean said, it's not just a set it and forget it. You do need to evaluate, on a case-by-case basis, because you could trip up.
Well, and soft language tends to be a little bit easier when you think that they might give you the domain or they might turn it over to you or something like that. Okay. Does that help answer your question? Okay. Did we have any other questions? Oh, we've got one in the back.
So in terms of recent detections that you've seen, have you seen any like unexpected increases in certain types of fraud, like smishing or like customer, like fake customer phone numbers that show up on like Google searches if they're searching for like a TripAdvisor support phone number?
We haven't seen anything where someone's putting a fake, like a fake TripAdvisor phone number to call. What I have seen are the phishing sites will actually link to our price protection or our purchase protection pages as in an attempt to kind of give the victim a little bit more sense of security, that they're, even though it says wire transfer, they click on the customer protection language, they think they're protected, even though the first line says do not wire transfer. So it's so we've actually seen them use our protection wording to soften the security risk that the consumer might feel.
That brings up a good point, because Brian Krebs talked about this morning SSL certs being utilized on phishing pages, and how, of course, we're seeing more and more of that. So I would say that's probably a trend. Do you guys see that as well in your phishing attacks, SSL certs on the phishing sites?
Oh yeah,
Typically?
yeah,
all the time?
They have fairly free, cheap encryption services.
Yeah,
So
short-term SSL certs, you can get them for 90 days for free. So they're being utilized quite a bit. I think that was the last question.
If you guys are more, we've got the networking time that we have afterwards or in a break for contact reception.
Okay.
If you seem to really like this topic and your feedback, so what we do next session.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi everyone. If you don't mind settling down, we'll get started. All right. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Aquino, and I've been with MarkMonitor for almost 6 years now. And it's really interesting because throughout this almost 6 years, I've spoken to many brand owners, including some of you. And the one theme that really comes up often is how do we get internal buy-in from the C-levels, upper management? How do we get internal buy-in